The Palestinian cause has been winning this propaganda war. Their backing by Russian information and influence agents has been winning this war against Americans, against Canadians. The Chinese are helping too, and they're winning the information war. And unless we get our handle on the information war, this isn't, oh, Israel's bad at the PR war. That's not the case. The case is that we have a very sophisticated KGB level information operation infiltrating all Western countries completely under our radar through the internet that nobody has been prepared for.
Is this fundamentally an information war rather than a military war? And does the West even realize that it's an ideological war?
So in the West, it's primarily an information war. In total volume, it's primarily an information war. A lot of Americans are not ready for this. Actually, I was talking to my wife last night, and I said that the most harrowing thing, at the time, it didn't strike me at all, but the most harrowing thing I think that I've read in the last 10 years, and I've read some pretty heavy stuff, is this one line in a report that was published by Richard Higgins and Steve Coughlin about the left and its operational system. I read it in 2020, and then somewhere in there, in the introduction, they said that there was an assessment done by the Chinese military and the Russian intelligence service in the late 1990s that assessed that America's ability to deal with information and narrative warfare was so degraded as that it might not exist. So we're not ready for this, right? And the social media has made it feel like it's happening, that it's our neighbors. You have all these people that are probably, and I mean, not probably, they're literally Pakistani, probably intelligence officers posing as bread and butter Americans, telling their neighbors crazy stuff, or their apparent neighbors crazy stuff. And Americans have been very slow to catch on that this information war is happening. In total volume, I think that it's in the West, more information war. In Israel, it's kinetic. It's not just information war. And it turns out that they're very, very good at the classic provocation game that all Marxists are very good at. You can read in Saul Alinsky's old book, Rules for Radicals, is that your enemy's reaction is your real action. So, on October 7th, they do October 7th atrocities. On October 8th, I tweeted, oh, we have Gaza Floyd on our hands here in the West. And so they're going to treat Gaza like the poor George Floyd, who's now being beat up on by a superior power, the police for George Floyd, Israel, with its backing with United States military, capabilities in theory, in the case of the Gaza situation. So, everything Israel does in terms, they get struck with a kinetic warfare attack, or they foil a identified terror plot. They use force. Maybe it's in southern Lebanon. Maybe it's in Gaza. Maybe it's, skirmishes in Judea, Samaria. Maybe it goes with the Houthis. Maybe it's direct strikes into Iran. Everything Israel does, and now also by extension, everything America does with kinetic force, is turned into a poor us victim story, as though they didn't provoke it in the first place, as though, as I'd like to say, they didn't have it coming. And so this is the essence of that information war, and they turn out to be surprisingly good at it. I don't know how actually people fall for this at this point. Oh, well, what about all the dead children? You mean the ones that they strapped to their chest while they ran forward with AKs? Yeah, well, don't use children as human shields in a military operation if you don't want children to catch stray bullets. And the Israelis go out of their, the Israelis are way better than the Americans in this regard. The Americans send in an F-16 and blow up a neighborhood. The Israelis are doing these unbelievably precision strikes to try to minimize loss of life, even for their, enemies, even for civilians who support the people trying to murder them. It's shocking to me that anybody falls for this many years later. On October 8th, it didn't surprise me that people fall for it, because the idea that the Palestinian culture is to just come out and reverse the roles of victim and offender and lie and lie and lie and project was just not something we were aware of. But we're 3 years into this lie. We're actually more like 20 years into this lie, with 3 years into this being an everyday lie that we're encountering. And it shocks me that people aren't seeing through it. But the fact is, our ability to deal with information warfare is so degraded that it might not exist, is that scary sentence I read. And we're actually frighteningly slow to catch on. So the wars are primarily kinetic in the region, but the bulk of the war in the bigger sense is an information war. And I think that's been true actually since the Vietnam War. They figured out that they could demoralize the home front with photographs, with propaganda in a way that they never could before. television and radio provided the instruments to be able to do that. You used to have to fly a plane over with leaflets and drop them to try to convince people, or send, infiltrators in who would hammer, bulletins to a bulletin board or something. And now it's not like that. You could get them on, a sappy story on TV that you paid somebody to read. And now in the internet age, you can literally have 1 million Pakistanis posing as Americans and British and Scottish and Canadian, pretending to be your neighbors who are outraged by this, and create the effect of, as Martin Gurry wrote about it in The Revolt of the Public, you can create the effect of the Arab Spring in any country you want using the internet. So social media plays a huge role in saturating countries that are not used to being massively propagandized directly by their enemies with massive propaganda directly by their enemies. And so far, hopefully this will start to turn, or is turning, but so far, the Palestinian cause has been winning this propaganda war. Their backing by Russian information and influence agents has been winning this war against Americans, against Canadians. The Chinese are helping too, and they're winning the information war. And unless we get our handle on the information war, this isn't, oh, Israel's bad at the PR war. That's not the case. The case is that we have a very sophisticated KGB level information operation infiltrating all Western countries completely under our radar through the internet, that nobody has been prepared for. And it includes, as we're now becoming much more aware of, homegrown, whether they're bought, whether they're captured, whether they're just bad, I don't know, actors like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and that entire giant crew, which is increasingly looking more and more and more like a coordinated network that was activated to do this, not just in the wake of October 7th, but in the lead up to October 7th as well, that we're all having to now deal with. I mean, I'm sure it's just a total big giant coincidence that Ian Carroll, who has pushed the anti-Israel line probably the hardest, weirdly in right-wing spaces, since he's not even a right-wing character, just so happened to randomly publish a book about the Palestinian cause and the problem of Israel on October 6th, 2023. I'm sure that's a massive, miraculous coincidence that he happened to lay that piece of track out the day before the attack. So I think there's a very broadly connected network of people who are very likely working directly with our enemies from within, that are also making this information war even harder for our high trust society Western countries to detect. Israel has this advantage that they live among terrorists, and every day is kind of a frontier survival story, and has been since its refounding in 1948, but since the beginning of the Zionism movement, plus the history of the Jews. So they have this advantage of knowing better than to act in a high trust way around low trust people, right? And Americans and Canadians and Westerners in general basically have been fat and stupid about information warfare and propaganda for decades, because we've had that luxury and we've lived in a very high trust society, and that's being taken advantage of in the same way that the Conceptia was taken advantage of in Israel before October 7th. And it's not a very popular view anymore. You don't find too many even kibbutzniks out there, hippies out there arguing for Gaza anymore, because they wised up. Well, America, Britain, France, Germany, Canada, Australia all need to wise up in the same way. We're all being played by this information warfare that's being waged by all of the enemies of our Western countries or democracies at the same time.
Why do you think it is that some America First voices have become increasingly hostile towards Israel? I think you would refer to them as the woke right. Why is that so, and why do we see it more and more now?
Well, I have some guesses as for how, and then there's guesses as to why, and they're not the same story. The why is easier. The why is because it's a perfect wedge, and the way that this has happened is through massive propaganda of the type I just described. You have Russian agents who have posed as right-wing cells. You have, frankly, traitors who might be Democrats, who might be assets of foreign governments, who might just be agitators for their own other causes, independent causes, who have been embedded within the broad MAGA movement from its beginning, who are pushing these kinds of views and have been pushing these kinds of views. Again, you have the entire Iranian and then the whole Palestinian propaganda, machine backed by Russia and China. You have the Chinese who understand the benefits of this. From what I understand, the Pakistanis are very invested in this, and North Korea, believe it or not, is somehow somewhat sophisticated at this. I understand that very few of these entities are working together in the sense of an alliance, the way that the United States and Israel work together in an alliance, or the United States and Great Britain have worked together in an alliance. But they're more, alliances of opportunity, or frenemies, if you will, to use the term, that they don't really get along, but they both have mutual benefit to attack America, so they are. But the why is that it's a wedge. President Trump represents a massive threat to the breaking out of what is called the multipolar world model. The multipolar world model seems to have been a plan for a very long time. You see it on the kind of broad mondialist left under the World Economic Forum, which has been talking about the multipolar world and its emergence for decades. You see it in like the Center for Foreign Relations. You could even see the old kind of like Cato, AEI, these kind of think tanks were talking about the emergence of the multipolar world. You could see it from Heritage. You could hear Marco Rubio giving speeches 3 or 4 years ago about the world, as this is just a matter of fact that the multipolar world has arrived. The multipolar world, from the perspective of China, is a stepping stone to a Asian century dominated by Beijing. So they're behind this whole project. But then you have the Russian Duganites who have infested the American right wing, who've been pushing this multipolar world model. And the problem is that America is too strong, especially American business hegemony and American military hegemony are both too strong for a multipolar world to really take off. And people who understand actual America first agendas, like President Trump, are a major hindrance to the emergence of. President Trump doesn't want a multipolar world. He wants an American-dominated world. He thinks that Americans are not a perfect steward of power, but the best steward of power that's ever existed in history, and they should remain the global steward of power. And even if you don't believe that we're all that good at it, by God, we're better than Beijing, and we're better than Moscow. Putin and Xi are not exactly exemplars. The CCP and whatever the main party of Russia is are not exactly exemplars of ethical behavior in the world, whereas the United States, for all of its mistakes and missteps and foibles and errors and evil actions that it may or may not have taken, has been a generally good steward of peace, prosperity, opportunity, freedom, all over the entire world. And President Trump understands this. So President Trump has to be disrupted. MAGA, the movement that supports him, and any likely successor to him in the vein of political thought, has to be disrupted. And Israel's the wedge. So that's the why.